me just quickly introduce Eric, and then I have a comment about the video as well. So Eric was Chief Acquisition and Planning and Development for Orange County Parks. He established over 20 of the county's parks and historic sites, laid the groundwork for an additional 20,000 acres that have since been established. You were master planner for all the major projects all over Southern California, and you're native.
Yeah.
So he's been involved thanks to people like Eric and Scott Ferguson, who was going to come today but couldn't. That's why we're here, and that's why this park is here. So did everybody get a chance to look at the video?
Yes.
Okay. Was there anything that struck you about the video? Did you notice how much water was in the streams?
I just assumed it was winter.
When we had winters.
We're not even having, I looked at that and I thought, it's green. There was part of it was shot from up here, and water was rushing over the Nevada crossing.
We used to have cars towed out of here because the water was so deep in the road.
So it was very, it was very, it harkens back to a wetter time.
Yes.
And full of interesting information. But my lasting memory of that was, look at all this water. You know, it was great. So with that.
Okay, so basically what we got going here is kind of a little historic overview of the Caspers Wilderness Park area. And I'm going to have to read this talk because there's no way that I could. You just please bear with me. And questions will be welcome. And you can put those to myself and Scott Thomas, who's our recently retired OC Parks Design and Planning Manager, and we'll be glad to answer them afterwards. So anyway, back in 1973, Eugene and Applin Starr Foundation donated 3,779 acres to the National Audubon Society for the Starr Ranch Sanctuary. And it was part of the prominent Democrat and multi-millionaire Los Angeles oil man Eugene Grant Starr's 10,097-acre Gentleman's Ranch that for 36 years was a secluded and rustic hunting retreat until his death in 1963. And today, that land consists both of the Starr Ranch Audubon Sanctuary, major portions of Caspers Park, and the community of Dove Canyon Golf Course community. Now, Starr and his partner, Jack Hare, started stitching the land together, beginning with homestead purchases from the Joplin family and Minnie Justice, beginning in 1927. In 1938, which was a year of epic storms, that was the year that all of Orange County, central Orange County, completely flooded. Hundreds of people died in Santa Ana from Anaheim and everything. It was the biggest storm in the 1900s. But in that year of 1938, Starr bought Hare out and also bought 4,412 acres from Rancho Mission Viejo. And then in 1941, he purchased an additional 4,554 acres. So that's what put the 10,000 acres together. And Paul and Helen Colburn were the initial Audubon caretakers for less than a year when Norm and Bev McIntosh took over as the first managers, and they served until 1977. And I worked with them very closely to foster good relations between the Audubon Sanctuary and the Harbors, Beaches, and Parks Department, in particular in Caspers Park. And then Jeff Froke managed for a short stint, and then Pete and Sandy DeSimone took over. And how time flies, because they've been here almost 40 years.
Really? Yep.
And they're still here. And I want to give credit to Molly Bloomer, a sanctuary intern who researched and wrote the sanctuary, the Audubon Sanctuary's history, in 1997, and also to Pete DeSimone for a recent phone conversation update. Now, two women played a critical role in preserving the Audubon Caspers area. One of them was Hortense Miller of Laguna Beach. When the Star Foundation donated the sanctuary, the National Audubon Society was at first reluctant to accept it for lack of funding to operate and maintain it. And it's a little known fact that Hortense Miller donated the funds to endow the Audubon Sanctuary. We first met, Hortense and I, at Laguna Nursery, where I used to wait on her all the time in the 1960s. And by then, I was a graduate student in biogeography at Long Beach State and made frequent use of the extensive botanical library in her fabulous home at the top of Boat Canyon in Laguna. She had no children, and eventually I began to realize that she looked upon me as her son or grandson. I'm not sure which. Eventually, we became close friends, and shortly after I started here at Caspers, I would pick Hortense up in my 1969 Volkswagen Squareback surfer wagon, and at her estate in Laguna, which, by the way, she donated to the city of Laguna Beach in life estate as the city's botanical garden. And we'd drive up the Ortega Highway to Caspers, and then up Bell Canyon and through the Audubon gates out and back here, sometimes with up to 7 wet dip crossings, depending on the runoff, to get to the Old Star Ranch House. Now, Hortense always packed a picnic lunch consisting of her trademark cucumber sandwiches with fruit and her famous homemade lemon cake. Now, those sandwiches must have been the secret to her long life because she lived to 99. Anyway, during one of our picnics there, out of the corner of my eye, we're sitting at a picnic table and we're having lunch, and out of the corner of my eye, I looked down on the ground and I spotted the corner of a bronze plaque that was laying enshrouded under some fallen sycamore leaves. And I reached down and I picked it up, and it read, Oscar Miller Picnic Grounds. And I said, Hortense, that's your husband. And that's when she confided in me about the endowment in his memory that she made. It was just as she wanted it, never advertised. Now, Hortense was a St. Louis school teacher who decided to break away and attend the Chicago Art Institute. And she married successful Chicago attorney Oscar Miller, who was about 30 years older than her. Now, the other woman, not to be upstaged, is the legendary Ilse Burrs. Affectionately known as the mother of Caspers Park. Now, you know, Ilse's famous for having put 17 places, or whatever the high number is, on the National Register of Historic Places, including the Los Rios District and San Juan Capistrano and even Crystal Cove. She was quite the California historian. But what many people don't know is that it was Ilse who late in 1973 relentlessly lobbied then Board of Supervisors Chairman Ronald W. Caspers to buy the original 5,500 acre park. And it took more than just convincing Caspers, because in early 1974, she relentlessly browbeat the other 4 supervisors to go along with the idea. She just kept hammering and hammering them until they finally gave in. Scott Ferguson worked in Caspers' office at the time and played a critical role in making it happen. So there was one caveat hanging over the deal, though, the purchase deal. At the time, one of the most powerful politicians in Orange County, Supervisor Ralph Dietrich, insisted that sand and gravel would be mined here. And it wasn't included in the board resolution, though. Ilsa also served on the Orange County Historical Commission and the State Trails Commission for quite a number of years. And as many of you know, she was quite the equestrian. And like her Herculean efforts on Caspers, she blazed tons of equestrian and hiking trails throughout the county, not the least of which was the regional San Juan Creek Trail and much of the municipal trail system throughout the city of San Juan Capistrano. Now, Ilsa was the wife of prominent physician Dr. Roy Burns. Not only was he one of the founding physicians of both mission hospitals, he also served as mayor in San Juan during 2 stints, both in the 1970s and then much later in the 2000s. And they had 4 children, and I took lunch to their daughters, Barbara and Catherine, just last Sunday at the family home, which is not far from here. Roy died at age 94 in 2019, and as many of you know, Ilsa died at the same age just a few weeks ago. The family has asked me to announce to you that her celebration of life is scheduled at El Adobe Restaurant on Saturday, April 16th at 11 o'clock, and you are all invited. And you are to either RSVP to Barbara Burns at BG Burns, BYRNES, at packbell.net, or just give your RSVP to Marcia and she can give me the list and I'll turn it in. Now, in 1970, I founded a landscape company called Biosphere Landscape Company that specialized in landscaping oceanfront homes in Laguna, and including the Villa Rockledge, which was the seaside mansion of Frank Miller, who founded the Mission Inn in Riverside. And Rockledge is also on the National Historic Register. And I lived there in the stone tower on the cliffs for 5 years, the ocean cliffs. And in 1974, there was a bit of a recession that got underway, and landscaping activity slowed down. So what happened was, early that December, a friend alerted me that the next day, the county would be interviewing for 30 Comprehensive Employment Training Act, or CETA, job openings. It turned out that 8 of those 30 job openings were for the trail crew here at Caspers. So I got up at 2:30 in the morning, and I jumped in my Volkswagen Squareback, and I raced up to Santa Ana, and I was number 29 in line.
Wow.
And by 8 o'clock, when the doors were opened, there were over 900 people for 30 jobs. My interviewer was Tony Gimbroni, and he said that I was overqualified for the trail crew, but he hired me anyway. And so, 47 years ago, on the 14th of January in 1975, was our trail crew's first day at work. And Tony Gimbroni was the Park Ranger 2 in charge of Caspers Park, assisted by Park Ranger 1, Richard Sanchez. And they executed the general layout of the initial park improvements envisioned by the Harbors, Beaches, and Parks design chief, Ralph Hudson, and the chief of operations, Joe Cardello. And the circulation throughout the park basically consisted of just the old dirt ranch roads. They were self-evident, they were functioning, there were some repairs that needed to be made and so forth. And the layout of the campgrounds was pretty sensible, with campground, what was then called campground A through E, and A was the closest to the park entrance for RVs, which is still, I noticed some this morning coming in, and campground E was furthest up Bell Canyon in the most pristine setting. Now, other than that, there were shocking turquoise blue Andy Gump porta potties, rental porta potties, strewn up the canyons, sticking out like sore thumbs because they were turquoise blue in the midst of this greenery. And there were rental trailers for the park office and storage, and there was a maintenance barn. And given the rough highlands terrain in the park, we had the ubiquitous Orange County pickups. I know some of you were around long enough to remember all the county's trucks used to be orange because it was Orange County. Now they're all white. And we had a 4x4 Jeep Grand Cherokee. And towards the end of that first day at work, Joe Cardello, the chief of operations, came up to welcome the motley trail crew from headquarters. There was a huge rattlesnake slithering just outside the maintenance yard. Joe had a holster and a pistol. He had it on because he liked it. He loved coming out to Caspers because he could let him just be himself. You know? So he pulls out this pistol and he shoots the rattlesnake right in front of him. It gets worse. Hang on. Then he took the snake and he plopped it on a workbench in the maintenance shed and cut it into 7-inch sections or pieces for each of us to take home for dinner. The snake segments were still writhing. You know, when snakes, they will continue to writhe after they're dead. I was pretty disgusted with Joe's idea of what I should have for dinner, especially at the Villa Rockledge. So we worked 4 days a week, 10 hours a day. So we were off on Fridays. So Thursday at 5:30 when we were off, I jumped in my car and I tore about a mile down Ortega Highway with the snake segment still wiggling in a bag in the floor of my passenger shotgun seat. And I pulled off the road and I tossed it into the bushes for the turkey vultures. The skin of that snake was mounted on a nice piece of wood with a brass plaque and hung in Cardello's office. And Joe Cardello just recently died at age 92 at his home in San Juan Capistrano, where the mounted snakeskin still hangs.
Wow.
And I am so glad that Larry Lehman, who was at one time the director of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks, and I went to visit him just last spring, and I've got some video of that. It was very pleasant. Anyway, it was a glorious time at Caspers in what I well knew to be one of the most pristine surviving slices of prehistoric Southern California landscape anywhere. Replete with towering oaks and sycamores and babbling creeks with Pacific pond turtles to boot. Now, one reason why Caspers was so pristine is that the stars reportedly only had 6 head of cattle grazing on the entire 10,000 acres at any one time. That's the difference. That's why Caspers looks so much differently than the rest of the Rancho Mission Viejo. And for that matter, the heavy grazing on the Irvine Ranch. So our first job, the trail crew's first job, was to make some truck trail repairs up the west wall of Bell Canyon. There was a truck trail that went up the west wall onto the Coto Ridge. And hiking up to the work location early on the third morning on the job, there were 3 huge deer herds in the meadow below, down on the floor of Bell Canyon. There had to be 70 deer. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And it was in the wintertime, still in January. And then guess what? A mountain lion with 2 cubs ran across the road right in front of us.
Oh, wow.
And that was my first of 7 sightings that I've been lucky to have since then. Now, after those trail repairs were done, we began to build the San Juan Creek Trail, which headed up this way, which didn't exist. It was complete fresh construction. And it was under the supervision of park maintenance worker Ed Williams and groundskeeper Darrell Bennett. Now, Ed Williams became supervising park ranger over the years as he was promoted, and he wound up running South County beaches and Dana Point Harbor and stuff years later. But from my initial Comprehensive Employment Training Act job interview by Tony Gimbroni, he recalled that I had trail experience on the Mount Whitney Trail, where my family has had a home for the last 70 years at Whitney Portal. So, after hoeing and digging the new trail tread on the San Juan Creek Trail with my 7 colleagues and lining the sides with native rocks, Ed Williams handed me a big roll of pink plastic ribbon and told me to scout ahead, tying the ribbon to the bushes to align the trail, switchbacks and all. And we wound up. I mean, the trail became really long. It went up way up over the ridge and did a big loop and came back down this way. I think maybe, I don't remember how many miles wound up being in the trail. Some of you probably do know.
It's about 5 miles.
Now, on a Friday, about 5 weeks after we got started building that trail, the groundskeeper, Daryl Bennett, who usually drove to the Harbors, Beaches, and Parks headquarters at 1901 Bayside Drive in Corona Del Mar, where the Harbor Patrol is. He was sick, and normally he would go down on Fridays in the old-fashioned days when you would go to pick up the payroll. They didn't have electronic deposits in those days. You got a box with checks, and you brought it up and you handed it out to the employees. But he was sick, so Gimbroni sent me. Said, jump in the truck and go get the payroll. So anyway, I get down there, and Larry Lehman, who was the acting Harbors, Beaches, and Parks director just after Ken Sampson, the founding director, had retired, he spotted me in the lobby in a county uniform. And he knew me because I was on a team that did the general development plan update for O'Neill Regional Park just a couple of years earlier. "What are you doing in one of our uniforms?" he asked. "I'm working for you, Larry," I responded. "Doing what?" he inquired. "I'm on the trail crew at Caspers Park." "Oh, no, you're not. Not anymore. Report here on Monday morning." So, boom, I was gone. And Larry put me to work on doing a lot of special studies, including mapping the natural resources both within Caspers and throughout the Harbors, Beaches, and Parks system. And I was given 2 offices. They didn't have actually office space for me in the headquarters on Newport Bay, but they had a library that was a waterfront, floor-to-ceiling glass room right on the waterfront with the library, and there was a round table with 4 chairs, and that was my desk. So they stuck me in there. But then the other office that I got was the storage trailer at Caspers Park, which was over here. And it was a regular full-on length trailer, but it was storage with paper towels and bottled water and all that kind of stuff. And I set up my shop in the storage trailer to undertake my new assignments. And they were kind of ranged from all kinds of things that they threw at me. I did new parkland acquisition feasibility studies. We mapped the geologic formations, not just in Caspers, but at other parks as well. The hydrology, mapping the soils, mapping the wildlife circulation corridors, and a variety of other special studies. But one of the last ones was they set me up. You know, the San Juan Hot Springs was always kind of thorn in their side because the hippies were going up there for years, smoking pot and soaking, right? And having lived in Laguna Beach, it was a popular place for people from Laguna to go as well. I never ventured to do that because I thought, no, this is too risky. But now, once I got to Caspers, I finally went up there with the rangers, and we looked around and saw remnants, actually on both sides of the highway of the old resort. And so they gave me this task of writing a report on the remnants and mapping the remnants of the old San Juan Hot Springs. And Tom Martinez, who was the assistant chief of operations working under Cardello, actually made me go back up there and count the number of trees. Now, you know, you're talking about a 20-acre area, and I had to count the number of trees. And he didn't specify what truck diameters, so I counted them from this side, and there were like 600 and some odd trees. Took a couple of days worth of work. It was fun. I didn't complain about the assignment. And that was back in the days when there were a lot of alders. There were a lot of white alders still on Hot Springs Creek that began to show signs of decline with pest infestations way back in the late 70s, kind of like what we're experiencing now with the oaks and stuff. I don't know whether there's any alders still surviving there. I haven't been up that way. Now, I had a lot of fun helping to gear up for the first Caspers public open house. Some of you may have been there. I managed to borrow a lot of stuffed animals in plexiglass display cases from the San Diego Natural History Museum at Balboa Park in San Diego. My friend Helen Witham was the bird curator there, and that was my connection. So I made about 10 trips back and forth between Caspers and downtown San Diego with a county pickup, loading all these plexiglass cases and dragging them up here. We just didn't set them outside overnight because we still had a rental trailer. There wasn't any place to safely put them. And then the open house was actually very successful. It was attended by about 1,700 people. 1,700 people showed up at Caspers, and they were from all over the county. Now, there were 3 alternative park master plans on display, mounted on easels. And they were developed by Ernie Reynolds and Associated, who was the landscape architect that the county design department hired to do the master plan. And those 3 alternatives range from wilderness preservation on one end to more intense recreational uses proposed in Caspers at the other end of the spectrum. And Bob Borthwick, a prominent Laguna Beach landscape architect, was on Reynolds' team. Now, for an advanced cartography class in the geography department at Long Beach State, I developed a seemingly innocuous questionnaire for the visitors to fill out. Systematically handed it out to every adult who examined the 3 alternative master plans. And the questions were like, do you support picnicking, camping, equestrian activities, wilderness and wildlife habitat preservation, a golf course? That was one of the possibilities. The last question was, do you support mining of sand and gravel in the park? I could get away with this because I was a student. Residents from all 5 supervisorial districts attended. The surveys were statistically analyzed, and the results of the sand and gravel question were mapped on a statistical surface map that showed that the majority of visitors from all 5 supervisorial districts were opposed to sand and gravel. That ranged from 85% opposed from residents in the 5th district, where we live, where we are now, down to 55% opposed in the 1st district, which is in Santa Ana. Well, that's understandable because they live in a concrete jungle. So, most of the other districts were also heavily opposed. The next in descending order was the 3rd district, which neighbored the 5th district. And even in those days, like where O'Neill Park is in that area, and the 4th district in the North County, and even the 2nd district in Huntington Beach and Seal Beach in the West County. Now, in the meantime, I had brought my parents up to the park for a picnic one weekend, and they loved it so much that my dad ran out, even though we have a cabin at Whitney Portal, he runs out and buys a souped-up VW Westphalia camper with a pop-up roof, solely to use in Campground E on Thursday evenings after I got off work. And my mom whipped up tasty, near gourmet dinners in that camper, and they slept in the camper, and I slept outside in my sleeping bag on an air mattress. And it was magical back in those days. Screeches, growls, hoots all night long. It was like sleeping in a noisy zoo. It was. It was just, this place was just outrageous. And one night, a bobcat got treed by a pack of coyotes near our campsite. You want to talk about a racket? Oh my God! The combination of the screeching and the howling and oh God, it was a scene out of a Disney movie. So shortly after hiring on, after I hired on, the Environmental Management Agency, which was the county's first super agency, took form, and the Harbors, Beaches, and Parks Department, and the Planning Department, and the Public Works Department, and Building and Safety, and everybody got sucked into that big super agency, and the staff of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks had to leave its Newport Bay waterfront headquarters in Corona del Mar and relocate into a concrete tomb known as Building Number 11 in the Orange County Civic Center in downtown Santa Ana. Now, you want to talk about a morale buster. Jeez. I was the only person left on the Bayside Drive premises because they hadn't figured out what to do with the Harbors, Beaches, and Parks library in which my office was located. The space planners that, figured out how they were going to relocate these people forgot about the library. So they didn't, that's how that happened. So all that was left at Bayside Drive was the harbor master and me. And of course the sheriffs, the guys that drive the boats. And that was pretty cool. Except that I really still hung out at my trailer at Caspers about 90% of the time because really enjoying relatively unsupervised freedom to roam throughout the entire park system, making myself as useful as possible. Now, twice a week, I would dutifully go down to Santa Ana into that tomb just to stay visible because, you got to stay connected with your coworkers and stuff like that. And then one day, after months of being in that wonderful trailer down here at the bottom of the hill, Larry Lehman called me into his office and said, "I have something to show you." So he takes me down along what we call bullpens. Bullpens are a huge floor of a building that's got cubicles in it, and then the corridors, and they call it the bullpen because it's like a cattle pen. They just throw everybody in there. So he takes me down a bullpen corridor to a standard cubicle that had a drafting table, a stool, and an empty bookcase in it, and said, "This is your permanent work location." So I was relocated as well. And so began about 29 years of commuting from Laguna Beach to Santa Ana. Now, at first, when I still lived at the Villa Rockledge, it took about 22 minutes to get to Santa Ana. By the time I retired in 2005, the same commute usually took 90 minutes or more, due both to the explosive urban growth and the inevitable car accidents that bring traffic flow to a crawl. Now, there were two seminal events at Caspers that I'll never forget. The huge winter storms between 1977 and 1980 that dumped about 65 inches of rain here on the park, scouring and systematically steepening the banks of both San Juan and Bell Creeks, and toppling 150 huge sycamore trees that floated downstream like toothpicks into the abandoned Conrock sand and gravel pit, abutting the Seaward Park boundary. That pit itself had head cut back up into the park with all of the raging waters going down to fill it up. worsening the situation, and litigation ensued, which resulted in a $1.2 million financial settlement in favor of the county, which is what funded the installation of the ugly rock-filled gabions that line the creek banks to prevent further loss of land that you can still see from down there. So before that happened, these creek beds were just beautiful. They were flat, they babbled, there was lots of vegetation, there were little islands, with massive sycamores. It was pristine, but all that changed that in just that one huge seminal event. It was one of the things that I got to do was I flew with Ronald Caspers' successor, supervisor, and Marine Corps General Thomas F. Riley. I flew with him. He commandeered a Huey from the Marine Corps. Even though he was retired, he still had some pull, So he commandeered a Huey, and in the midst of a giant storm with the doors wide open, we flew up from Tustin Lighter, the air station where the helicopters were, and flew up and down both Bell and San Juan Creeks in a raging storm, just watching those sycamore trees that are 125 feet high. They looked about like this, just floating like toothpicks downstream. It was a real mess. It was a terrible calamity. The other event was in 1986. It wasn't a very fun year either. That was in March of that year. 5-year-old Laura Spall was attacked by a mountain lion, followed almost right on the heels in October by another similar attack on 6-year-old Justin Mellon. In contrast, a more pleasant event was around 1976 when Mrs. Caspers, remember her husband having disappeared at sea on the yacht when he blew up, when Mrs. Caspers and her surviving children, because they lost a couple of kids with him on that, motored up Bell Canyon, as I guess you saw on the video, in a white Rolls Royce. we were blown away. We're waiting for them. Everybody's standing sentry, and we're waiting for Mrs. Caspers to come. And here comes this white Rolls Royce. Well, they owned Keystone Savings and Loan. That was a banking chain in Orange County that was founded by Ronald Caspers. And they had branches. Their buildings were very distinctive. They were Cotswold British buildings. The closest resemblance would be the Five Crowns restaurant in Corona del Mar. They were really kind of rather stately, high-class places. But anyway, they motored up Bell Canyon in a white Rolls Royce to celebrate the park dedication, which was kind of out in the vicinity of campgrounds D&E and further up the canyon. And that event is mentioned in that video history, I guess, that you saw. And the memorial plaque attached to a big rock was unveiled, along with a great big picnic luncheon. And several years later, the plaque and rock were moved here, just outside the Interpretive Center. It used to be way back up in the canyon, now it's right out there. Now, those events aside, it was a glorious time. We established Santiago Oaks Regional Park, Aliso and Wood Canyons, and Riley Wilderness Parks. Aliso and Wood Canyons' irrevocable offer of dedication was negotiated in my living room at 463 Bluebird Canyon Drive on a series of Saturday mornings when two kind of intimidating vice presidents from the Mission Viejo company that owned and were going to build Aliso Viejo came and beat on my door and thought that they were going to browbeat me into submission, but I stood my ground. And also Peters Canyon Regional Park, the first increments of Laguna Coast and Weir Canyon Wilderness Parks, the vast expansion of O'Neill, which only had 263 acres when I started, and when we left it's over 3,000 acres. That's partially because of the Arroyo Trabuco dedication, which is the largest sycamore grove on the planet, California Sycamore Grove on the planet, was added. The Upper Newport Bay Ecological Reserve, Harriet Weeder Regional Park, Limestone Canyon and Whiting Ranch Wilderness Park, and the 2,000 acres that were added to Caspers. In places like Lantern Bay that overlook Dana Point Harbor, and the expansion of Salt Creek Beach Park, and establishing Capistrano Beach Park, which is now washing into the ocean. 1,000 Steps and Table Rock Beaches, historic parks including Key Ranch and Helena Majeska Home and Gardens, and the Irvine Ranch Historic Park, which is now where OC Parks is headquartered, and vast stretches of regional open spaces that really weren't parkland, but we had thousands of acres in open space. There wasn't parkland. And one good example is when you're coming down the 5 freeway into San Juan Capistrano, the entrance to the city from the north is framed by the huge wall of the Colinas Bluffs. That was all going to be developed. That whole mountainside that goes from Nellie Gale Ranch down into San Juan Capistrano. That's an example of a regional open space. And then, like I mentioned, scores of local and community parks and open spaces throughout all these communities: Mission Viejo, El Toro, Lake Forest, North Tustin, Laguna Hills, Rancho Santa Margarita, Ladera Ranch, Talega, Laguna Niguel, Aliso Viejo, Coda de Caza, Dana Point, etc. And, on top of all of that, my staff and I programmed the capital improvements, because you take the revenue projections that come to the Harbors, Beaches, and Parks District, which is a property tax increment, and we updated every year the capital expenditure programs, and even did a 5-year capital expenditure program, so you could lay out into the future the different facilities and things that needed to be built that led to things like this interpretive center and other places. And so we programmed those things, and there were 2 fun improvements of note at Caspers. One was the refurbishment of the old corral windmill and water tank back up there. Now, the downtown office staff was laden with a couple of bean counters who wasted a lot of time fussing about spending a measly $10,000 to $15,000 to refurbish an old wooden ranch water tank. It seems like it took 5 years to finally get it done. And God knows how many thousands of dollars they spent fussing about it, but it finally got done for less than what they fussed. The cost was less than their fuss cost. The other improvement that many of us thought was ridiculous was the Caspers Tot Lot just down the hill from the Interpretive Center over here. We had one problem. I mean, yeah, it was beautiful. It was rustic materials, very creatively laid out. There was one problem: mountain lions. So I will confide in you that we secretly called it the Tot Lot of no return. Okay? Not that we don't like kids, it's just that we're just being snarky county employees. As far as urbanization encroaching towards Caspers, we fought hard to keep the Codo homes from being built atop the ridge top overlooking Bell Canyon, because their original proposal was that they wanted to have those big mega mansions right up on top of the ridge, and we would have seen them from within the park, and they would be looking down into the park. So that was a success. We managed to prevent that from happening, but there were major disappointments as well. The biggest one of them to me, it was what I call a broken promise, because in 1993, Richard Reese, who was the vice president of planning for the Rancho Mission Viejo, company, and who had previously been the vice president of planning for the Irvine Company for 25 years, took me out to dinner at Diz's restaurant in Laguna Beach, and we sat down to negotiate the dedication of the 930 acres addition to the Arroyo Trabuco to O'Neill Park, and the 1,800 acre addition to Caspers Park across the highway over here. And that was in return for development entitlements for them to build the new city of Rancho Santa Margarita. Now, in that same sitting, included in that promise was the Verdugo Canyon, which is right across, the entrance to which is almost right across from the Caspers Park entrance, would also be dedicated. And then I got a phone call about 3 days later, back in the office, from Richard Reese, reneging on Verdugo Canyon. And the reason why was that is where Richard O'Neill walked his dogs. That was the excuse. We didn't mess with Richard O'Neill, so it didn't happen. And then the other thing is that as you drive up the Ortega Highway today, obviously, you'll see the ultimate creep coming up towards Caspers with the development of the new community of Rancho Mission Viejo. And quite frankly, when I was basically half 1 foot out the door retiring when the finishing touches on that were done, but we had demanded that they put a much big conservation zone. There are nice conservation zones in that development. A lot of them have citrus and avocado and to stay viable and things, but we had from my perspective, we had demanded that they have a big complementary reserve on the backside of this ridge right here, but we didn't have the support of the then current department heads at the county, and so it didn't happen. So from the last I saw in a cartoon drawing, the development is going to come right up to the edge of the park.
Will it overlook? Will we be able to see it?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. Something for you people to keep your eyes out on. A lot of people are hoping that there will at least be a carve out to keep Tree of Life Nursery around, since they play a critical role propagating the native plants and trees for habitat restoration projects throughout all of Orange County. You gotta get a little bit of water. New urban development, like we're talking about, requires a lot of concrete. So what happened to Supervisor Ralph Dietrich's insistence that Caspers be mined for sand and gravel? Well, assuming that our open house survey fell on his deaf ears, it didn't on the ears of Supervisor Riley and Supervisor Clark. But the matter still hung out there. And then something truly remarkable happened. Thanks to the efforts of people like Shirley Grindle, who founded Time Is Now Clean Up Politics, aka Tin Cup, it turned out that Leon Rose, the architect for the then new Board of Supervisors headquarters building in downtown Santa Ana, had piped a $100,000 kickback to Supervisor Dietrich from the Anaheim Hills Company, and probably also in return for awarding the building design contract to Leon to design the headquarters building. That was the final nail in the sand and gravel coffin. Dietrich went to prison, and sand and gravel at Caspers was dead. But, you know, don't assume that there won't be future proposals that could threaten the park. We were getting proposals to build dams up in the upper reaches for water storage and things for the South County water supply. These kinds of things, you know, can crop up, and you got to keep your antennas up, and that's where organizations like yours come in, because all I can do is encourage you to stand your guard, and don't forget, by the way, when you're looking after the well-being of the park, that there's a couple of 100 acres that most people forget about that came kind of late. It's kind of some swan song stuff that I pulled together. If you could hold that up. So here you got the main park here, then you got the Audubon Sanctuary here. But you see these green slivers? These are several hundred acres. And these we bagged off from Codo and from Dove Canyon to help buffer the Audubon Sanctuary from adjacent development. But administratively, they're labeled as part of Caspers Park. In other words, they're managed by the rangers and the staff here. So they are part of the park, but they're way up going in the direction of Trabuco. Just this uppermost one at the mouth of Trabuco Canyon, that's part of O'Neill Park. Okay, that's a little known part of Caspers that a lot of people forget about. So, let's see here. So to sum things up, I think the best thing that happened at Caspers was its initial purchase and the land additions that came afterwards. And the worst thing is global warming and wildfires. It really hurts to see what's happened to the magnificent limestone canyon in Whiting Ranch Wilderness Park. The whole thing is, as you drive the toll road, you just go right up through it. It's just a Martian landscape. So keep your fingers crossed for the Audubon Sanctuary in Caspers. Now, my colleague, Scott Thomas, is the second successor to the founding Harbors, Beaches, and Parks design manager, Ralph Hudson, who I mentioned earlier. Ralph, by the way, is memorialized, for those of you that ever go down into Dana Point Harbor to the event center, there's a boulder outside of the main entrance with a bronze fishing hat attached to the top of it, and that is Ralph Hudson's memorial. He died of brain cancer, and so that was a memorial for him. So Scott's going to join me in answering any questions you might have.
Recently, with all the affordable housing issues, there was a long list of places in Orange County that could have affordable housing. Caspers was on the list.
Well, you have these task forces. You know, cities in Laguna, we have an affordable housing task force. They don't know about deed restrictions. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
That's good.
So many of now there's different types of underpinnings in the parks. In the case where you purchase the land, like we did for the initial 5,500 acres, that it doesn't come with it wasn't dedicated by a ranch owner that puts restrictions that run with the land. You just purchase it outright. But nevertheless, and then you get the other kind of parklands, like the 8 or 9 that are established on the Irvine Ranch, where they have built-in deed restrictions that say any change in use, okay, the land reverts to us. It goes back to us, and we put it in our corporate portfolio. Okay, so there's a disincentive there. The 1,800 acres that we purchased over here, actually, the Rancho Santa Margarita, when they conveyed it to us, does have a clause that says required parkland for 55 years. Okay, but overriding all of that is that The County Park Abandonment Act of 1959 is the only fail-safe protection that we have. That's statewide legislation. It's embedded in the State Resources Code. And that's the one where you may have heard fairly recently there was a skirmish going on over in the Upper Newport Bay Ecological Preserve, where one of the residents whose home abuts it was insisting on trying to pull some strings to get the county to detach a portion of the parkland so he could put it in his backyard. Okay. Now, that sounds crazy, but believe it or not, that kind of thing was going on all the time and probably still does. But the County Park Abandonment Act of 1959 stipulates that if the signatures of 200, minimum 200 duly registered voters on a petition to the Board of Supervisors opposing the abandonment of any sliver of any portion of any county park, the Board of Supervisors has to set a public hearing to discuss the matter, and it takes the decision making out of their hands and requires that the question of the abandonment, even if it was just 6 square feet in some park, has to be placed on the ballot for the next general election and be decided by all of the voters in Orange County, in the county. So you see, it's a built-in disincentive because, first of all, that's an expensive thing to have to, if somebody's really got to want to have that piece of land pretty bad to put it up to a county vote. And we had various times over the years when we had people that, or parties or corporations that wanted, to do things like that. And so getting back to the affordable housing, that is a use, which is, first of all, in the general plan, there's a definition for each of the types of parks. There's wilderness parks, natural parks, and urban regional parks. And they have specific allowable uses in them. For example, golf courses are explicitly prohibited from within wilderness parks. Now that's in the general plan. That doesn't mean it's absolutely fail-safe, because they could amend it if they wanted to. But you'd have to conclude that affordable housing is not consistent with a wilderness park use. The other thing, we got a similar thing in Laguna. They've identified some parking lots in downtown Laguna and this and that, and the school bus parking lot in Laguna Canyon, and the this and that and the other thing. But the Mission Hospital in Laguna Beach has got a 7-acre piece of land that is wrapped around by the South Laguna Ridgeline segment of Aliso and Wood Canyons Wilderness Park, and it's just all native brush, and they've identified that. But wait a minute now. We're already losing enough homes to wildfires that are built in the brush, right? That's one of the biggest problems why, so many homes have burned, is because the county boards of supervisors are so lackluster, or, they just keep whatever the developers want. And look on the backside of the Santa Ana Mountains over in Corona and Temecula, where all the houses are just halfway up the side of Santiago Peak. They're going to go someday, And so, there's, I was unaware of this. And this is a county affordable housing task force that identified Caspers?
Well, I don't know if it was a task force. I just remember, I probably wasn't paying much attention until I saw Caspers and realized it was a list of affordable housing.
And you saw it in the newspaper, or?
Probably.
Oh, okay. Well,
I don't believe everything I read.
Yeah. Well, you got it.
Some of the campers.
But that's where the role. One of the critical. Even we wrote it into the general plan in 1979. About 4 of us got locked up in a back room, and we had to rewrite the Orange County general plan. And I had to rewrite the recreation element, which was the master plan of regional parks, local parks. the trail system and all that, and then the resources element, which is the open space element. And we in there we described the vital role of the volunteer organizations in helping to establish and then to safeguard the long-term well-being of the facilities. That's where you guys come in. That's where the Laguna Canyon Foundation comes in, the Laguna Canyon Conservancy, and the friends of, the various parks. That's where you come in. And one of the things that I want to encourage you, pardon me just a minute, it's so critical for all of these organizations to keep bringing young people into their groups, because we know that, we're not going to be around forever, and you've got to bring young people in so that they can get invested, so that you have new generations, just like we continuously planted new generations of trees throughout the Harvest Beaches and Park system. Every few years we get a Small Business Administration grant that was established under George W. Bush for tree planting, and we would keep infusing, new oaks and new sycamores in at Irvine and O'Neill and Caspers in different places every few years, so you can stratify. You want to have stratified forests, you need a stratified population in these volunteer groups.
I know.
Yeah. So, anyway, yeah.
Listening to all of these battles which you have fought and won for us, by which thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of that. But since you're not there now, I'm thinking that it might be a good idea for us to find out exactly what is coming before our Board of Supervisors and what companies are wanting to build where, and how, if we had a representative just going to the Board of Supervisors meetings, would that do it? Or is there something else we need to do, or would you even recommend that?
Well, other groups do that. I kind of think as the umbrella organization looking after or safeguarding the OC Park system is the Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks. Okay, that's the umbrella organization. I presume some of you people are members of the Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks. They meet on a quarterly basis with the director. And they get politically active.
The important part of that group is they are an umbrella group, so they bring in these grassroots organizations with each sector of the county. So then all the supervisors are listening to this group a little more carefully, because their votes are also within these organizations. So you can go single-handedly and argue a point. You're probably going to get 5th district support by getting all the other supervisors behind it. The key thing, though, is this grassroots organization is what that umbrella is going to listen to, because you guys know this park like the back of your hand. So I've seen a lot of you at some of those meetings. They're quarterly meetings with the director. Also OC Parks, that in these quarterly meetings you get a lot of information from OC Parks about things that are coming up, like on the horizon: encroachment, development, wildland urban interface issues, fire, whatever. So it's really I'm glad you guys participate in that, but that would be another way to look at it.
I remember when Tom Wilson was the 5th district supervisor.
Right.
We had his name right when you came in the gate. There was a plaque, and he came to the park. That was another thing he did, which I don't think any supervisors come anymore.
Yeah, and to Tom Wilson's credit, he was also on the Coastal Greenbelt Authority after he was retired from being a supervisor. So he's got a skin in his, he's got a good heart, and you do have those politicians. I believe there's still people that recognize that these places are special. The park system is their jewel. They go out for ribbon cuttings to see their new sign out front. And that's what the other value of this group is. When the supervisor comes out here, you can give them a great tour, show them your new overlook and kind of your you're sweating the game of what you produced as your organization, but also OC Parks can showcase some of the work and how they're, just really,
feed them.
yeah,
Feed them.
exactly.
Feed the ego.
Feed 'em.
Feed the ego.
Coffee helps
Now,
too.
have you go ahead and invite Supervisor Bartlett out?
Oh, I don't think I want to invite him.
Well, you'd be smart. I don't think that
I wouldn't.
she
invite him.
attends and she speaks. She's spoke many times at Laguna Canyon Conservancy dinners and stuff. She certainly knows about the importance of the Laguna Greenbelt. So, and she lives in Dana Point, so I'm...
Well, Spence can do that.
I could say in my 32 years at OC Parks, I just retired, but my 32 years, the amount of ground breaking, shovel, that is where a supervisor really highlights. When they list their achievements for their term, they list those achievements as their, number top 5, so I think that says a lot. And they're obviously they're politicians, but it says a lot of, I think, just humankind needing these places for refuge and,
I remember several shovel holding pictures in Caspers through the years. I do have a little Tom Wilson story in that I took care of his wife when she was ill. And I remember after we'd been to Caspers a couple of times and we talked a lot about Caspers, I wrote him a note and said that he was proof that there are good people that are politicians. So then a few years later I saw him again and he told me that he carried that letter in his briefcase.
Wow.
So he was really a good person.
yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
All the parks, there's no county like Orange County that I've ever seen. Parkland, urban parks, the wilderness park. Is there a comprehensive plan? I know we've got freeways and this continues to grow. To connect it from the sea to the mountains, and to connect all these lands. You've got Laguna Coast, but it's isolated. Well, it's connected to Aliso Wood Canyons, but you can't get from there to, say, Caspers, Star Ranch. You have Cleveland National Forest, all this public land. Is there...
There was intentionally, when we rewrote the general plan in '79, which, by the way, was adopted by the Board of Supervisors in 1980, and I don't know how many times it's changed since, but there were mountains to sea corridors. The big ones were the Santa Ana River, Aliso Creek, for example. There was policy language to link all of the regional facilities with minimum trail linkages, but also green belts, and there are remnants of that kind of thing. But
Yeah, we have Rick Sherry here today. He's sitting in the back there. He was instrumental in a lot of the regional trail plannings, so he would, help with that effort for these regional. So the big one that I haven't heard mentioned is we have a planned trail to link to General Riley Wilderness Park just over the ridge here, which is a part of the ranch development plan, but a regional connection and a very important one from a human travel perspective. So getting that trail through there is really critical in making these linkages from there to O'Neill to here from the coast. So yeah, very good point. There is this sort of comprehensive plan within the county's master plan that Eric touched on, the regional recreation part of the general plan, and that's kind of laying out the mandates to try to have this connectivity as best we can. So each park plan, when we were developing the park plans, we look for those regional connections. If they weren't embedded already into Rick's plans Rick was preparing, we try to make other community linkages also, just more short-term kind of connections.
I want to thank you for the question, because that was another item I wanted to point out. It's actually a breathing, living human being in your midst, who is Rick Sherry, that's leaning up against that post right there. He was the underpinning of so much. He kept track of all the acreage and all the dedications and all the record keeping as the system grew, and performed other essential things. It was in land relative to land acquisitions and obtaining grants in my early days at Harbors, Beaches, and Parks, and he's the only guy that's left in town that knows where all the skeletons are.
And you know where all the stuff.
And I'm learning
Yeah, but
something every
nobody
day
else.
from this guy. He's a good guy to work with.
Actually, it was Rick that on that video, the YouTube videos on the history of the OC Parks is 14 of, it's 14 of them. And the way that got started was, it was about 6 months before I retired. A couple of board offices sent the message down the food chain that they thought it would be a good idea if I did a history on the OC Park system before I retired. I had about 6 months left. So every day, Harry Huggins on my staff, who had a video camera, and I would run out, and we just run around all over and stand up on ridges, and I would just rattle off the top of my head what happened here, what happened there. And they were all on these little mini cassettes, and then as is inevitable, you go into the woodwork, the retiree, and then the remaining employees get busy and stuff, and the whole thing kind of fell into limbo. And he lost track of his videos, his little video cassettes. And I've been asking him about him, over the years a couple of times, and he said, gee, it's probably, I think it's in the computer mainframe at the county or something. And then he comes up to my cabin at Mount Whitney, and he's got this canvas bag, and he hands it to me, and here are all these little cassettes. So what happened was, though, that he left me the old video camera so I could stick the cassettes in and look at them to see what was in there. And the first one I stuck in was water skiing on the Colorado River, which had nothing to do with, which meant that they got
Harry
some of them,
taped over.
they got taped over for Harry's vacations, but not all of them, about a third. So, but and Rick was the one that took all of that stuff and did an Excel spreadsheet and this is after, he's retired now, to help us develop that. He took all that stuff and put it all on a spreadsheet so we could figure out what we had, what was missing. So then Harry and I had to run out 13 years later. That's why I'm 13 years older in some videos than the other. And we had to redo Dana Point Harbor, and that was an example of one that got erased and stuff like that. But anyway, so
Those are very important. You could just Google Eric Jessen. You'll find the videos. But when I had my staff, newer staff onboarding, we would show them the series of those videos just so they could learn if they have projects like at Caspers, the acquisition history, why this place is important. So laying down sort of that foundation of, the genus loci of each place. That's really came from Eric and his. So we need future Erics too, though. There are changes over time with every place, right? And there are different stories that's where we need, have sort of that legacy built into the park system. Hopefully we have these people that are storytellers like Eric. Nobody like Eric, but they can kind of take it from there too, yeah. So I've got some good staff that I built in there, and hopefully they're going to carry the baton and teach the others about these places. So
We should have videotaped you.
he
we
did.
got it.
He did. Oh,
And all your questions are there too.
Is your speech on computer that could go over here in the archive for?
I'll email Marcia a copy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
sure.
have one other question. My two children went to Dana Hills High School, and on the day that the Redwood Spa place at the Hot Springs opened, they ditched school. And their picture was taken and put in the register on the front page as Mr. and Mrs. Brady. But
funny.
And they were high school age.
They were,
A young married couple is what you, okay.
Ditching school.
brother and sister. And they took a long time living that one down. But when you were telling your story, I know that it burned, and I know that it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
But was that where you went out and counted trees
Yeah.
after that fire?
No, it was
Because your date was before.
It was before Russ. Russ Kiesig was the concessionaire. He had a very well established, very successful Sycamore
north.
Mineral Springs up by Morro Bay, San Luis
Yes,
Bay,
yes.
San Luis Obispo area.
Oh, okay.
And in those hills that trend towards the ocean outside, basically down a road behind the Madonna Inn, okay? And he's the one that came down and redeveloped. No, I was much earlier than that, you know.
That's what I thought,
Yeah.
but then I didn't, because if this is in Caspers, how did he get to do that development of the hot springs?
Well, it was a concessionaire. That was
okay.
the way that we brought it under control, because there were always people hopping the fence. It was a closed area. You know, there's you know, smoking, drinking, drugs, and the sheriff would do an occasional raid. Even before Caspers was established, they would show up there sometimes and raid and have a bus to haul everybody down to the jail in Santa Ana. So the way to domesticate it was perfect. We got a concessionaire that came in, and he, you know, redeveloped, you know, because the original plunge was still there.
Yes.
So they redeveloped the pool, and they did the original, first the redwood hot tubs, and then later you know, there were different ones. Some of them had to be relocated when they took the you know, straightened the road a little bit and stuff. But it was kind of neat because Russ Kiesig, I actually went to the Sycamore Mineral Springs. We went up there with a bunch of friends, and it just happened to be one of the nights was when the Statue of Liberty was rededicated. And we all sat in our in the hot tubs there. They were on the decks of the hotel rooms. They weren't out on the grounds like here. So you sat on your deck and you looked, you know, you had a sliding glass window and you looked at the TV and you watched the, you know, Lee Iacocca and Ronald Reagan and the rededication of the Statue of Liberty with all the fireworks sitting in one of his hot tubs.
That's nice.
You had a question.
Yeah, I have several. Elsie was instrumental in having Bridgestone Villa put on those historical sites. This is the Rock House. If you go up Ortega and you head toward go past the fire station, just before you reach the narrow bridge, there's a driveway that goes down to the right. And this is a house that is built literally of rocks that size. And she was instrumental in getting that put on the historical.
I remember seeing it on the list.
Just tick the Forest Service off nothing. On that, because they can't touch it. And when the fire came through.
Oh, so you mean we're talking about the summer home tract up here? Is it in the?
No, you go, but you pass the fire station. Just before you reach the narrow bridge, there's a large driveway on the right-hand side of the road. You go down into the valley. And there are 3 houses there. I'm not talking about the hot springs.
Yeah.
This is
the San Juan Creek summer home
tract. The house next to the Rock House burned. The one on the left of it is still there. I've been inside the house. It's owned by a psychologist in Huntington. But it has a plaque out there on the front that talks about this being done.
Yeah.
So that was one of her favorite things.
Yeah.
She and I have talked about the old adobe in the.
I'm glad you brought that up.
In the Hot Springs City. And it's still there, still has a tarp over it, but we wanted to do something. We could never get people to get involved with it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
you do actually know where it is, though.
Absolutely.
Because she tried, you know, she and
I were out there.
Yeah. She was talking about it with me, and I was still, I never was able to get out there. I thought it was something that was mythological, that had to go be found.
No,
I
it
was
has been
there too.
damaged in the past by people thinking that, see, when they built adobes in the past, they would toss the trash inside. And that trash is now valuable keepsakes and the like. And so people were tearing the wall down, thinking that the hollow sections had debris inside of it. No, it didn't. It's solid adobe. But it does have, or at least it did the last time I looked, have a tarp over it to keep it from being ruined by the rain. But that rock house is really an amazing place to see on that. The other thing, the quarry up here almost became part of Caspers by one day. That the guy that owns it now, or leases it, he had 1 day left to release it again, and he did. So my question to you is there anything in the system to keep a watch on that when his lease is up? If he doesn't renew it, is there anything in line to grab that section, which almost reverted to Caspers? Where the quarry is, where you go up there?
Ortega Quarry.
No, it's right here. Right where my thumb is.
That whole section would have reverted to Caspers, but the guy went up there and filed on the last day he could to get that. So that's what we have now.
It's actually shown as proposed regional park. In the event that would happen, but it also depends on who's on watch at the county and how actively they're pursuing new park expansion opportunities and inholdings and how actively that's being pursued.
Right. Well, this is going to be going on for years.
Yeah.
That's a long-term thing. Okay, the other thing, on that map, there's one like that in the office upstairs, in one of those boards that open up, and it showed there was a section of proposed Caspers that never came into being. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The White Hole, where the Nichols Institute, or whatever they call it now. Quest.
That's the Nichols Institute right there.
It's the White Hole. Yeah.
No, where are we? It was on that board, if you can see it upstairs, it's one of the old boards. It was something that kind of looked like it was in this area.
Well, see, what happens, the area where the Broken Promise was this white area, the Verdugo Canyon that I was telling you about, where Richard O'Neill walked his dog, that would have been this whole area right here. And I don't know what the master plan is for that use of that area on the ranch plan.
All right. The area directly across Ortega from the fire station is part of Caspers. That when you go down that dirt road directly across from the fire station, you go down that dirt road where the houses are.
Yeah.
On the right-hand side, you'll see about halfway down, you'll see the fence. It says Caspers Park. Is there anything going to be done with either that section or the Narrows, which is what I consider the prettiest part of Caspers?
I don't know. We're both retired.
No, but it must have been.
No, it's part of the general
discussed
development
at
plan.
one
That's a
time.
different phase area, and it is listed in the current general development plan. It hasn't been updated since when we were. It's been a while. So if there
I've
is
been
ever
retired 16 years.
if there's ever an update, and one of the things as planning design manager, we have a backlog list of planning documents that we got to refresh. We just did one for Mile Square Regional Park, and now we're reclaiming part of the golf course into a more natural area of the park. So these kind of things, again, this organization really, when that comes online, your insight into that, if you'd like to see that happen, get a new survey, have Eric develop a survey for that piece. But that's kind of his original planning, set the stage for this overall general development plan, as they call them in the county, and that's the land use plan for the park.
Okay, last question. These isolated sections you were talking about up by Coda de Plaza.
Yeah.
There was at one time a plan to run a trail from the current locked area at the end of Caspers to connect, maybe it was the next park over, maybe it was O'Reilly perhaps? Whatever happened to that?
So there is a connection plan for Riley through the Mission Viejo Company's land, and that's still an easement that they've got to dedicate as part of that development. So that's called the Riley to Caspers connection. So that is in the works. There's a bridge crossing that needs to be built right at the Gubernadora.
Kenyatta
Gubernadora.
You got it. You said it right. Kenyatta Gubernadora.
Okay, I always mess that one up. Gubernadora. Yeah, so there is a planned connection there. Yeah.
And actually, doesn't it even go up onto Tierras Ridge and then into O'Neill? It ultimately goes to O'Neill, doesn't it?
Yeah, that way.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you again.
Yes.
And now it's very clear to us that we are able to work in the park, entertain visitors that come in. We're getting a lot of new visitors because of the development. And
Are you mean new residents from?
yeah, new residents.
Okay, this is going to be their backyard park.
So our visitor load is going up.
Oh, good.
And so for us, I think as volunteers, there's this trade-off between how much is too much for this park, and so what is our role in that? Now personally, I think, and I think most of our volunteers agree that this is an opportunity to educate the people about the outdoors. They bring their kids. We talk about the plants. We talk about the animals. But at the same time, we don't necessarily want thousands of people coming in to the park. So the idea, I think, is people come in here and camp for one night. A lot of people come in here with small kids that camp for one night. And I said, why are you here? And they say, well, because if it doesn't work out well, we can be home in 20 minutes. Right? But they expose their kids to it. Now, hopefully that carries on and they go to other parks. So.
And then the other thing is, though, that you can mine those people for membership in your organization.
Well, we do.
Yeah. And get them vested in their,
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword with the carrying capacity of an area. Like I live in Laguna as well as Eric, and so I'm on the Laguna Canyon Foundation board right now since I've been retired. But the issue we're dealing with that is just over capacity, especially with COVID. People are out on the trails. They're, so with this organization, and so that was 30 years ago when I moved in Laguna. I started the planning for Laguna Coast Wilderness Park, and at that time we had I could see maybe a couple people on the trail. I go out there today on a weekend, I see probably 50, or sometimes on more popular trails, 100 people.
Right.
So yeah, that is, you get more people to invest in, they love this place, but they don't want to love it to death. So as the sort of carrying capacity of the land, it has to be monitored to see kind of what we have to gauge, what the impact of that is on the ecosystem, and how is that going to ruin their experience, and let's not make that happen. But it's a real dilemma we're dealing with. It's like how to control that number. We can do it through parking, entrance, and staging, but when they can, 20 miles away, they could probably ride or take a highway on their bike, get here. So that's very dangerous. I wouldn't advise it. But there is a regional trail plan.
Laguna Canyon has access from all around it.
Yeah, all around it. Yeah, you have it pretty much on two sides here.
Right.
What we see too is that, of course, we have the added benefit of camping, right? So a lot of people are here for more than one day, but that's limited. There's only so many spaces. And like you saw on the sign when you came in, it's the middle of winter, it's full, right? Nobody else can come in. So that is self-limiting. And I think the other advantage we have is we have over 30 miles of trails. And so a good portion of the people that come in don't go past the end of the pavement. So even on, like a day like today, if you were to walk a quarter mile up some of the trails like Bell Canyon, you're going to see a few people. But it's not overly, I don't think, crowded. To some people, they may think it is. But we have a whole lot of area to disperse people into.
Yeah.
So I'm just bringing it up because it's something that I think all of us, we want to promote the park. We want to teach people, but we don't necessarily want them to come back.
Right away.
It's hard to control those, it's like pulling levers, it's not, there isn't a Wizard of Oz that gets to be in charge of all of this stuff behind a curtain. Look at Yosemite, and they've struggled on a massive scale with some success, some improvements. Thinking about that, I can't remember what triggered it, but there was a real interesting. Do you remember when Caspers was overrun with surfers?
No.
Do you remember? Do any of you remember that?
Did they camp here and go to the beach?
No. There was some phenomenon that was going on. It wasn't a surfing event. It wasn't a beach closure or something, but the park would fill up, the campgrounds would fill up at night with surfers with their surfboards. They'd get up at the crack of dawn in the morning and go down and go surfing. This, do you remember when that was? Do you remember?
Maybe a place to stay that didn't cost a lot of money.
Yeah, it was, but it was a short-term phenomenon that happened. I actually remember driving through the park and taking pictures because it was, Volkswagen vans with surfboards and stuff, and it was like, what's wrong with this picture? What are they all,
Out of place.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe it was the closure of, maybe San Onofre was closed, camping or something. It might have been, it was something that triggered them coming here. I can't remember what it was.
Well, and we used to have weddings in the park. I mean, really, and a lot of artists used to come out and paint. Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh,
A wedding or a painting?
Yeah, Ron's daughter.
Oh, in the park. I think I remember you talking about.
Yeah, about 2 months ago.
When you were camping in your trailer here, were you right there at the bottom of the hill?
Back at Campground E, the furthest campground.
Oh, okay.
Because there was someone there that I remember them saying, well, that person comes every 30 days or stays for 30 days.
Oh.
Because then they have to leave.
I know, we didn't, even at the beginning, you couldn't stay 30 days. What is our limit? Is it 2?
I think it's 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
It's 2 weeks.
But
Then they have to move and come back.
Because it was the same guy.
Oh, it might have been, maybe it was a raptor researcher or somebody, who
I
knows?
thought you were going to say maybe it was
Or the
you.
mountain lion guy, yeah.
Well, you were lucky to see the mountain lions.
Yeah,
And not me.